Just terrible that we have to do this. I would have never thought that I would be burying my daughter before she buries me.
When everybody stay close and wanted a lot of things out of life, she was going for it.
It's just terrible that someone could go through that, and then to know that they probably went through it by themselves and not had me or her brother or my husband or anyone that she knew that could be there, you know, at a time like this.
So I wasn't going to stop until I find out who did this to my daughter.
She screamed, "He cut my throat." Those words, panicked and broken, were the last anyone ever heard from 20-year-old Kania Brunson. Hours later, in the early morning stillness of a Milwaukee neighborhood, firefighters were called to a blaze. When the smoke lifted, what they found inside the charred remains of a car was almost unspeakable. A young woman, tied up, shot, and left to burn. The city was stunned, and her family's world shattered in a single night. But this was no random act of violence, no masked stranger lurking in the shadows. The man who authorities say killed her wasn't a stranger at all. He was a man she trusted, a man living a double life. And when his carefully kept secrets threatened to unravel, he made sure Kania would never be able to expose them. But here's where the story twists. In the hours before her death, Kania confided in someone close, warning them she felt unsafe. She believed the man she was seeing was capable of anything. She was right. And when she finally decided to reveal his hidden affair to the one person he feared most, it triggered a chain of events that would spiral into betrayal, blood, and fire. This is not just a murder case. This is the story of how love can become a weapon, how lies can become chains, and how a young woman with her entire future ahead of her was silenced before she could even cry for help again. Yet even in her silence, clues remained. Fragments of her last moments, whispers of her last words, the surveillance footage that contradicted a killer's alibi, and the 911 call that exposed the truth he tried so hard to bury. Tonight, we are not only telling you what happened to Kania Brunson, we are peeling back the layers of deception that stretched from a quiet family home to a burning alleyway. We'll follow the trail of secrets and witnesses, of desperate lies and unthinkable choices. And by the time this story ends, you will see how one decision, a decision to tell the truth, cost a young woman her life, but also ensured her killer could never hide again. This is the story of Kania Brunson. If this is your first time here, please click the subscribe button, turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any of our videos, give this video a thumbs up, and please let me know where you are watching from. If you are a returning viewer, I truly appreciate your support. Welcome.
It's some comfort to know that, we have the suspects and, they are being charged. But yet and still with the court system, kind of headache, pushing stuff back, rescheduling everything, and that's what's keeping us from not having all the peace we want.
Kania Brunson was just 20 years old, a young woman standing at the threshold of her adult life in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. To the people who knew her, she wasn't just another face in the crowd. She was their daughter, their friend, the one who could light up a room with her laughter. She had a smile that felt like sunlight and a way of speaking that made you feel as though you mattered, even if you'd only met her once. Kania had big dreams, dreams that shifted and grew as she did. Some days, she imagined herself as an orthodontist, carefully crafting perfect smiles. Other days, she wanted to be a veterinarian, saving the lives of animals who couldn't speak for themselves. And then there were the times when she leaned toward beauty and fashion, where she envisioned herself building a career that celebrated creativity and style. Whatever path she chose, one thing was certain: her family believed she was destined for something great.
But more than anything else, Kania was her mother's best friend. Not just a daughter, but a confidant. They talked about everything: school, relationships, the future. Her mother often said that Kania was wise beyond her years, carrying a mix of youthful hope and mature insight. Friends described her as fiercely loyal, someone who would defend the people she loved without hesitation. To her family, she was a source of pride, joy, and constant laughter. To her friends, she was the one they could call late at night when the world felt heavy. She was that kind of person, reliable, full of warmth, a reminder of all the good that still exists in people. But here's where the story takes its first turn. Behind that radiant smile, behind the plans for college and careers, was a secret she didn't share with everyone. A secret that would soon place her in the crosshairs of someone who had far more to lose than she ever imagined. At just 20 years old, Kania had fallen into a complicated relationship, one that seemed exciting at first, but quickly began to cast a shadow over her bright future. A relationship that would pull her into a dangerous game of lies and betrayal, where every choice carried a risk she couldn't see until it was too late. And as we move forward, keep this in mind. Sometimes the most dangerous people are not strangers lurking in the dark. Sometimes they are the ones who smile at you, the ones who promise to protect you, the ones who swear they love you. Because in Kania's case, love was not a shield, it was the very weapon that would ultimately destroy her. If you have a daughter and you find out she was hiding a big secret from you, how would you feel about it? Let me know in the comments section.
Meet Sultan Sharif. He was 53 years old, a man twice Kania's age, a man who already had a family, a wife, and a life that should have kept him far away from someone so young. On the surface, he carried himself with the kind of confidence that comes with age. To outsiders, he was respectable, even dependable. But beneath that carefully constructed image, Sultan Sharif was living a double life, and it was within that secret life that Kania became trapped. No one knows the exact moment their paths crossed. Some say it began as casual conversation, an innocent exchange that grew into something deeper. Others believe Sultan pursued her deliberately, drawn to her youth, her beauty, and the way she looked at him without the burden of knowing who he really was. To Kania, the relationship may have seemed like a thrill at first, attention from a man older, more experienced, someone who promised her things that felt exciting and new. But in reality, she was stepping into a web of deception spun long before she ever entered his world. Sultan was married, and his wife had been by his side for years. She had watched him carefully, quietly, the way only someone who knows every detail of a partner's routine can. She knew his habits, his excuses, the way he deflected simple questions, and over time she noticed the changes, the late-night calls he claimed were about work, the sudden need to step outside and take a phone call in hushed tones, the unexplained hours that slipped away without reason. Though she may not have wanted to admit it, she felt it. Her husband's attention was drifting somewhere else. And she wasn't wrong. While Sultan reassured his wife that everything was fine, that she was simply imagining things, Kania was being pulled further into his orbit. She believed him when he told her she was special. She believed him when he promised he would leave his old life behind. He showered her with attention, with words that made her feel chosen. Yet what Kania didn't know was that every word he spoke was layered with fear. Sultan wasn't afraid of losing her. He was afraid of losing everything else: his reputation, his marriage, his carefully built life. And as Kania's presence in his world grew harder to hide, so did his desperation. Those closest to Kania later said they saw small changes in her.
She smiled, yes, but there were moments of hesitation, little pauses where her confidence faltered. Sometimes she seemed distracted, lost in thought. Other times she seemed nervous, glancing at her phone too often, as if waiting for a message that might instantly change her mood. Her friends began to worry that she was caught up in something far bigger than she understood, and they were right. Behind closed doors, Sultan Sharif's double life was beginning to unravel. His wife was watching him more closely, piecing together the cracks in his stories, and Kania, perhaps tired of being kept in the shadows, began to consider something she had never dared before: telling the truth. For weeks she carried the weight of a secret that gnawed at her, torn between her feelings for him and the knowledge that he belonged to someone else. In her young heart, it may have felt like honesty was the only way out, the only way to break free from the lies. But honesty, in this story, would not bring freedom. It would only ignite a fuse that had been waiting all along. Because the day Kania Brunson decided to tell Sultan Sharif's wife the truth about their affair was the day her fate was sealed. Do you think honesty was necessary in this situation? Should Kania have ended her affair with Sultan and just moved on? Please share your thoughts below.
Kania could no longer carry the secret. The late-night calls, the whispered promises, the constant weight of being hidden. It had all become too heavy. And so, in a moment of courage or perhaps desperation, she decided to tell the truth. She reached out to Sultan Sharif's wife and admitted what had been happening behind closed doors. To Kania, it may have felt like the right thing to do, a step toward honesty, a chance to free herself from the chains of secrecy. But to Sultan, it was nothing short of betrayal. In that instant, his carefully guarded world began to crumble. His pride was bruised, his reputation threatened, and the fragile image he had spent years constructing now stood on the edge of collapse. He wasn't just afraid of losing his marriage, he was terrified of losing control. Sharif's rage burned hotter than anyone could have imagined. Friends would later recall how his demeanor changed overnight. The man who once spoke softly began to speak with venom in his voice. The man who claimed to care for Kania now spoke of her as a problem that needed to be handled. Behind his anger was not just jealousy, it was fear. Because he knew that once the truth slipped from Kania's lips, it could never be pulled back again. His wife now knew. And worse still, who else might Kania decide to tell? What if she told her mother? What if he told his friends, his community, his entire world? In Sultan's mind, her words had become a weapon, and he was determined to silence her before she could strike again. Yet even as Sultan's fury boiled beneath the surface, Kania carried on with a brave face. To her friends, she seemed determined, almost relieved to have spoken out. But when the conversations quieted and the smiles faded, those closest to her noticed the subtle signs of fear creeping in. She would check her phone more often, her hands shaking slightly after reading a message. She would grow quiet in the middle of a conversation, her mind clearly somewhere else. And when friends pressed her, asking if she was sure about the man she had chosen, she brushed off their concerns. "He's not like that. He wouldn't hurt me." But deep down, a part of her must have known the danger was real. After all, it was Kania herself who once warned a confidant that she felt unsafe, that she believed Sultan was capable of anything if pushed too far. She was right. This is the moment where I ask you, the viewer, what would you have done if you were in Kania's shoes? Would you have stayed silent, keeping the affair hidden in hopes that it would fade away quietly? Or would you have spoken the truth
no matter the risk. Kania chose honesty, but honesty in this story came with a price far higher than she ever expected. And then it happened. One phone call, a call that would confirm her worst fears and reveal just how much danger she was really in. The night of September 24th, 2022 would become the turning point in this tragic story. A friend of Sultan Sharif's noticed something terrifying. Kania, just 20 years old, trapped inside Sharif's car. What they saw was almost too horrific to process. Sultan on top of her, pinning her down. Panic filled the air. That friend dialed 911, their voice trembling, desperate to explain what was happening. On the other end, dispatchers tried to piece together the urgency. The words came fast, almost chaotic. He's on top of her. He's cutting her. And then, through the chaos, came Kanya's own voice, weak, trembling, barely able to form the words. She managed to cry out, "He cut my throat!" Those 4 words would echo through the night, an unforgettable plea for help. Imagine the silence after that moment. The dispatcher froze, the line went quiet, and all that remained was the sound of desperation and horror. It was just after sunrise when the call came in, on the corner of Keefe Avenue and Palmer Street in Milwaukee. A passerby noticed smoke lingering near an alley. At first, they thought it might be trash burning, something common in the area. But as they stepped closer, what they saw left them frozen in place. Lying there was the body of Kania, brutally discarded as though her life meant nothing. She was bound, shot, and burned, her final moments marked by unimaginable violence. The cruelty was beyond comprehension. When officers arrived, they immediately knew this was more than just a homicide. This was personal. The way her body had been treated told a story of rage, betrayal, and a desire to erase her existence. It was a deliberate attempt to silence her, not only in life, but even in death. Word spread quickly through the neighborhood. By mid-morning, residents gathered behind the yellow crime scene tape, murmuring in disbelief. Many had known Kania. She was young, vibrant, and full of life. Now, the alley where children once played had turned into a scene of horror. At her family home, grief fell like a storm. Her mother collapsed upon hearing the news, her cries echoing through the walls. Relatives tried to console her, but there was no comfort strong enough to mend the hole in her heart. "Not Kania," she whispered over and over again. "Not my baby." The family's devastation soon spread into the wider community. Churches held vigils, neighbors lit candles, and friends shared stories of her kindness, her laughter, her dreams that were now cut short. People wanted answers. They wanted justice. But as detectives pieced together the scene, one fact became clear. This was no random act of violence. The brutality spoke volumes. Whoever had done this knew Kania, and whoever had done this wanted her gone for a reason. And that raised a terrifying question. Who hated her enough to carry out something so cold, so calculated, and so merciless?
Detectives immediately knew this was not going to be a straightforward case. The brutality of the crime, the binding, the gunshot, and the attempt to burn Kania's body pointed to something deeply personal. This wasn't random, it was intentional. As officers combed through evidence, a familiar name surfaced again and again: Sultan Sharif. His history with Kania, the arguments, the jealousy, It all placed him squarely in the center of suspicion. But when confronted, Sharif remained calm. He told police that at the time of the murder, he had been at home with his wife. He insisted he had nothing to do with Kania's death. On the surface, it might have seemed believable, but detectives had learned long ago, liars slip eventually. They pulled surveillance footage from several corners near Keefe Avenue and Palmer Street, and there it was, grainy but clear enough. A vehicle matching Sharif's was caught circling the area. Time-stamped, placed. His story was unraveling. Then another twist. Investigators uncovered a second player, not just Sultan, but a man close to him, his brother-in-law, Johnny Allen Hopgood. The two men had been seen together in the hours before the crime. Witnesses came forward saying they looked tense, whispering about handling a problem. The theory became clear. This wasn't just a crime of passion, it was premeditated. Friends of Johnny admitted they had noticed his strange behavior after the murder, his silence, his unwillingness to look anyone in the eye. Sharif's wife, meanwhile, was caught in a storm of her own. The very man she had trusted was living a double life, now tied to a murder that shocked the entire city. Detectives pressed harder. Phone records placed Sharif and Hopgood in the area at the exact time of Kania's last moments. Tire tracks matched. Their alibis crumbled. The walls were closing in. And with every piece of evidence stacked against them, one truth became undeniable. Sharif and Hopgood had orchestrated this together. And soon, the walls began to close in on them.
Detectives didn't waste time. Within days of piecing together surveillance footage, phone records, and witness accounts, they moved in. Sultan Sharif, the man Kania had once trusted, was placed in handcuffs. His arrest was a turning point, not just in the investigation, but in the emotional storm that surrounded her family and the entire community. The charge was clear: homicide. But the story didn't end with him. Police also arrested Johnny Allen Hopgood, Sharif's brother-in-law, who investigators believed had played a role as an accomplice. The decision to charge two people revealed something far darker. This was not an isolated act of rage, but a calculated plan. News of the arrests sent shockwaves across Milwaukee. Reporters swarmed the courthouse. Headlines filled the evening broadcasts. Families across the city shook their heads in disbelief, asking the same haunting question: how could anyone do this to a young woman just starting her life? But for Sharif's wife, the reality cut even deeper. Overnight, she was dragged into the spotlight. Her husband now branded as a killer, her brother accused of helping him. She faced betrayal from every angle. Imagine being forced to relive the nightmare in public, reading court documents that detailed the brutal final hours of another woman, all tied back to the man you married. Those documents revealed more than just timelines. They uncovered premeditation, conversations, planning, and steps taken long before that night, proof that this wasn't a spontaneous crime of passion, but something methodical, something cruel. And yet the question lingered in the air. Was justice enough? Do you think the punishment for cases like this is ever enough? Can any sentence truly match the gravity of what was taken? As the courtroom filled with family, friends, and community members waiting for answers, one thing was certain: the trial would force the world to see, in painful detail, exactly what happened to Kania.
The trial began in a packed courtroom with every seat filled. On one side sat the prosecution, ready to lay out the horrific truth. On the other, Sultan Sharif and his defense team, cold, expressionless, and desperate to avoid what seemed inevitable. The prosecution wasted no time. They presented powerful evidence, grainy surveillance footage placing Sharif at the scene, the 911 call that first alerted authorities, and the burned remains that told the unspeakable story of Kania's final moments. Piece by piece, the puzzle was being laid out in front of the jury. But the defense tried to twist the narrative. They argued that Sultan had been influenced, that perhaps he wasn't the mastermind, or that his role was exaggerated. They attempted to paint him as a man caught in circumstances beyond his control. Yet with every word they spoke, the evidence loomed larger, proof too strong to be denied. Kania's family sat quietly in the courtroom day after day, holding hands, clutching tissues, fighting back tears. They weren't there for drama. They were there for justice. Every time a gruesome photo was displayed, every time another detail of Kania's suffering was described, the weight on their shoulders grew heavier, but they refused to look away. The jury sat still, their faces unreadable, but their silence spoke volumes. They saw through the excuses, through the defense's attempts to minimize the crime. What happened to Kania was no accident. It was deliberate, brutal, and heartless. And as the final arguments were made, the air inside that courtroom was thick with tension. Everyone knew what was coming, the moment that would decide whether justice would finally be served. The jury returned to the courtroom. The air was heavy, every seat filled, every heart racing. After days of testimony, cross-examinations, and gut-wrenching evidence, it all came down to this moment. When the foreperson stood and read the words, "Guilty of homicide," a ripple went through the courtroom. Sultan Sharif, the man who once pretended to care for Kania, was now branded forever as her killer. Johnny Allen Hopgood, his brother-in-law and accomplice, was also held accountable. The court made it clear, the attempts to silence the truth, to erase a young woman's life, had failed. But for Kania's family, justice in the legal sense didn't mean healing. Her mother, standing before the court during the victim impact statements, poured her soul out. She spoke through tears, but with strength in her voice. She told the court about Kania's laughter, her dreams, the hole in their family's heart that could never be filled. Her grief was raw, but so was her resilience. The community listened, and they grieved with her. Neighbors, activists, and local leaders reflected not just on Kania's story, but on a collective pattern, the violence faced by young black women too often ignored until it ends in tragedy. For many, Kania's case was not just about one horrific crime, but about a collective demand for change, for awareness, and for the protection of women like her. Kania Brunson's name now carried weight. It became a call to remember, a reminder of the lives cut short and the loved ones left behind. And though the courtroom doors eventually closed, her story would not fade. The verdict gave her family answers, but the pain, the questions, and the fight for justice, for Kania and for others, remained. If Kania's story moved you, please give this video a thumbs up, share it so her name and her truth reach more people, and don't forget to subscribe for more true crime documentaries. Every click helps us keep telling the stories that must never be forgotten.
November 29, 2024. A 15-year-old boy found his father in the most horrible situation after 4 days that he was declared missing. Follow me closely as we unravel the case of Jason Bloomfield. This is one of the most horrible true crime cases I have ever covered. Jason Bloomfield was 46, a Florida father who never pretended to be perfect but tried every day to be present. He worked, he planned, he showed up for his son. Friends called him steady. Family called him dependable. The kind of dependability that makes people trust you with house keys, with secrets, with the small promises that hold families together. He had a way of fixing things with his hands and smoothing storms with a joke. He wasn't supposed to be a headline. He wasn't supposed to be found like this. His last days didn't vanish into thin air. They were taken, inside the place where he was most unguarded, by the person who slept under the same roof and knew where the extra blankets were kept. But Jason hadn't disappeared. The week before, messages were still coming from his phone. They said he needed space. They said he'd gone out. They said not to worry. They sounded like the kind of words a man might use to soothe panic without giving details. Only the people closest to him noticed the tiny gaps, the wrong emoji, a phrase Jason didn't use, a sentence that ended where he would have continued. His mother reread them at night and told herself she was overthinking it. His son stared at the screen and wondered why his dad would text instead of call. Those doubts floated through the days like dust in sunlight, easy to miss if you didn't look straight at them. And while the doubts gathered, the house where Jason should have been alive filled with bleach and silence. Jason hadn't disappeared. Someone was living with his body for days. The line sounds like a rumor until you place it beside the little things that don't add up. A couch wedged against a bedroom door, a smear on a mop handle, a garbage bag full of rags that smell like a swimming pool gone wrong. Someone dragged him into that bedroom. Someone covered him with blankets and clothes, not to keep him warm but to keep him hidden. Someone tried to erase time with cleaning supplies and a locked door. And the most disturbing part isn't just the concealment, it's the ordinary rhythm that kept going around it, as if pretending hard enough could rewrite what had already happened. This is just the beginning of a case that will leave you speechless. But before we go deeper, I want to welcome you to the channel. If you care about real stories, the ones that deserve to be heard, make sure to give this video a thumbs up. It really helps more people find these stories. And don't forget to subscribe so you never miss the next case we uncover. Now let's get into the heart of what happened that day. Venietta Lennon, a 37-year-old woman who was often seen by Jason's side at cookouts and quick grocery runs. Outwardly, nothing about her demanded a second glance. She could be polite when she wanted to be, camera-ready with a half smile and photos that now look like warnings in hindsight. But behind closed doors, the temperature ran hotter. Friends of friends remember Jason growing quiet when her name came up, the way a person does when they are weighing whether to speak or keep the peace. There were arguments that ended with slammed doors and apologies that felt too practiced, jealous questions asked twice, phone checks that were passed off as jokes. You know the slow creep of control when you see it. It doesn't arrive like thunder, it comes like humidity, making every breath a little heavier until you don't notice how hard you're working just to breathe. On the surface, the relationship moved forward. Shared meals, shared bills, shared photos, but the ground under it was soft. Jason wanted stability. He wanted to build something that would last longer than an argument. Venietta wanted certainty too, but of a different kind, the kind where nothing slipped out of her grasp. If a friend texted him late, she wanted to know who and why. If he stayed an extra hour at work, she wanted proof. In public, she could be warm. In private, she could be volcanic. People who loved Jason learned to read the weather and schedule conversations for clearer skies.
Jason Bloomfield's life was, in many ways, a portrait of the everyday man people take for granted until he's gone. He worked steady jobs, nothing glamorous, but jobs that paid the bills and kept food on the table. He was the type of father who showed up at school events, the kind who would sit in the bleachers on a hot Florida afternoon just to watch his son play ball, even if it was only for a few minutes. His world revolved around his child, protective, present, and careful to build a bond strong enough to survive the storms of adolescence. Friends described him as dependable, a man who could be counted on to lend a hand, pick up the phone, or share a laugh at the right moment. But beneath that strength was a quieter longing. Jason wanted companionship. He wanted love. His life was full, but not complete. And that hunger for connection would ultimately become the very crack where danger seeped in.
It was in that space between stability and longing that Van Anita Lennon entered. Their first meetings seemed ordinary, two adults finding one another at a stage of life where second chances mattered. At first, she presented herself as supportive, attentive, even nurturing. She laughed at his jokes, she praised his dedication as a father, and she leaned into the image of a woman who wanted to build something lasting. For a man like Jason, weary of loneliness but cautious about who he let close to his son, this seemed like the answer he'd been searching for. The kind of love story people root for. At least, that's how it began. But as months passed, the warmth carried shadows. Friends began to notice the subtle shifts. Jason would grow quiet when she entered the room, as though weighing each word to avoid friction. A cousin remembered an afternoon barbecue where Van Anita questioned Jason about a missed call in front of everyone, her tone sharp, her smile brittle. What seemed like playful teasing at first revealed itself as control, little intrusions into his privacy, sudden flashes of jealousy, questions that felt less like curiosity and more like interrogation. She wasn't asking because she cared. She was asking because she wanted control of the answer. Jason's protective nature became a double-edged sword. On one hand, he tried to shield his son from the tension by downplaying it. On the other hand, he convinced himself he could handle it. He could fix this relationship the same way he fixed broken appliances or loose floorboards. He believed that if he stayed steady, the storms would settle. But storms don't always settle. Sometimes they gather, quietly, until the pressure finds its release in ways no one imagines. And here lies the bitter irony. Jason wanted stability. He wanted a home filled with peace, laughter, and the kind of routine that gives a child safety. Vianita, however, craved certainty of a different kind. She wanted ownership, to know where he was, who he spoke to, and why. When he gave her answers, she asked for proof. When he gave her trust, she responded with suspicion. The balance of love and control tilted further each month. And while friends tried to hint at what they saw, those sharp comments, those forced apologies, Jason brushed it aside. He wanted to believe in second chances more than he wanted to acknowledge the warning signs. The tragedy, of course, is that love, or what passes for it, can be a disguise. From the outside, Jason and Vianita looked like a couple building a shared future. They lived together, they posed for photos, they played their parts. But behind the closed doors of that Florida home, the cracks widened and the foundation shook. Jason's mother once said she could hear weariness in her son's voice when he spoke about the relationship. But he always followed it with the same reassurance. "I'm handling it, Mom." He thought he was. He thought he had time. What no one could predict was how quickly a household argument could turn fatal. Words raised, tempers flared, and then silence, the kind of silence that isn't peace, but aftermath. Jason Bloomfield believed his love life was just another part of his journey, with bumps and reconciliations like everyone else's. What he didn't know was that the relationship he clung to for stability would be the very thing that ended his life. No one could have predicted that an argument inside Jason's home would lead to his final breath. Too many people trust the wrong person, just like Jason did. Don't scroll past this. Give this video a thumbs up right now. Share it to warn someone who might be in danger without even realizing it. And subscribe so you never miss another case that could save a life.
The night the evil happened seemed ordinary to those living nearby. Neighbors later recalled hearing muffled sounds in the distance, but in the quiet of the evening, they brushed it off, assuming it was nothing more than the noise of a television or perhaps someone moving furniture. No one could have imagined that what they heard were Jason's final moments. Inside the house, everything was far from ordinary. Jason was shot multiple times in the living room, his body collapsing where he once sat in comfort. The sound of gunfire was sharp, violent, and quick. But once the echoes faded, silence filled the air, broken only by the shallow breaths of the woman who had pulled the trigger. Vianita stood over Jason's lifeless body, her mind racing. The man who had trusted her, who had opened his home to her, was now lying on the floor in a pool of blood. Panic set in. She knew what she had done could never be undone, but instead of calling for help or admitting the truth, her thoughts turned to concealment. She grabbed his arms, straining with effort as she dragged his body across the floor. Every pull left smears of blood on the hardwood, marks she desperately tried not to look at. Inch by inch, she hauled Jason's body into the bedroom. Once inside, she covered him quickly, layering blankets and clothes over him, as though burying him beneath a false sense of normalcy. She wasn't satisfied with just hiding the body. She shoved a couch against the bedroom door, creating a crude barrier, as if the sight of furniture would be enough to erase what had taken place. But the truth lingered in the air, the metallic scent of blood, the dark stains on the floor, and the weight of silence. Still, she wasn't finished. Vianita fetched bleach, rags, and a mop, moving frantically as she tried to scrub away the evidence. She bent over the stains, her hands working feverishly, the harsh chemical smell filling the house. The harder she scrubbed, the clearer it became that no amount of bleach could wash away the crime she had committed. The floor still told the story, and the walls seemed to close in with each desperate swipe of the rag.
Vianita knew she had crossed a line that could never be undone, but instead of panic, she leaned into deception. As Jason's body lay hidden in the bedroom, she picked up his phone and began crafting a story. To his family and friends, Jason was suddenly texting like nothing had happened. The words were brief, vague, and unlike the way he normally spoke. But for Vianita, that was the point. She wanted people to think he had simply walked away. She sent messages claiming he needed space, that he was overwhelmed, that he just wanted to disappear for a while. At first, it almost worked. People wanted to believe Jason was alive. They wanted to cling to hope rather than face the darker possibility. But the cracks in her lies showed quickly. Jason's mother read one of the texts and said quietly, "That doesn't sound like him." His friends agreed. The phrasing was off, but tone was wrong. Something felt artificial. And then, Vianita took the deception even further. She got behind the wheel of Jason's car, withdrawing money from his account, as if he were still alive. She even posted cryptic messages on social media, hoping to create an illusion of movement and independence. But with every lie, she was only tightening the noose around her own neck. Now I want you to imagine this for a moment. You get a message from someone you love, someone you know better than anyone else. But as you read it, something feels off. The words are theirs, but not their voice. The rhythm is wrong. The soul behind the message is missing. Would you recognize it? Would you question it? Or would you cling to the comfort of thinking they were still out there, somewhere? The police would later confirm what Jason's family already feared. Those texts weren't his. Every message had been fabricated by Vianita in a desperate attempt to erase suspicion. But here's where the story takes a darker turn. Because while the world thought Jason had walked away, his body was still inside the home, hidden beneath blankets and clothes, decomposing just feet away from the very phone she used to impersonate him. And there was a detail that made the deception even more disturbing. During the days that followed, neighbors recalled seeing Vianita leaving the house in different outfits, carrying bags of cleaning supplies, even laughing on the phone as if nothing had happened. Behind closed doors, she sprayed bleach across the floors, mopped repeatedly, and opened windows to mask the smell. But no matter what she did, the odor of death began to creep through the walls. Jason's sister called one evening, her voice trembling. She said, "This doesn't make sense. Jason doesn't write like this. Something is wrong." And for the first time, suspicion turned into certainty. They knew the man they loved hadn't simply vanished. Something terrible had happened. But here's the twist no one expected. In her frantic attempt to play both roles, the grieving partner and the vanished victim, she slipped. She sent a message that contradicted an earlier story. She claimed Jason was traveling, but at the very same time, she was caught on surveillance withdrawing money with his card. That inconsistency would plant the seed that finally unraveled her web of lies. And yet, as the days stretched on, Jason's body remained in the bedroom, covered, concealed, forgotten by no one but the woman who had put him there. Imagine living beside the body of someone you once loved. That kind of horror shouldn't go unnoticed. Give this video a thumbs up to keep Jason's memory alive. Share it so people see the truth of what happened behind closed doors, and subscribe because these stories matter even when the killers try to silence them.
Vanita didn't run. She didn't panic. Instead, she stayed. For days, she carried on inside the same home where Jason's lifeless body was left to rot. Imagine that for a moment. The man she once loved, now gone, and she went about life as if nothing had happened. The smell was the first sign, a thick, sickly odor that clung to the air, seeping into the carpets, the walls, even the curtains. Neighbors would later recall noticing something foul when they passed by. But Vanita? She lit candles, she sprayed air fresheners, she tried to mask the truth with artificial scents. And at night, she would lie down in the same bedroom where his body was decomposing, just feet away. She pulled the blankets over herself as if everything was normal. She closed her eyes in the silence while Jason's son grew increasingly worried. He hadn't heard from his father. Calls went unanswered, messages ignored. She didn't just kill him, she lived beside him as if nothing had happened. But how long could she keep up this facade? Jason's family grew restless. His mother called repeatedly. His siblings sent messages that went straight to voicemail. And every time they reached out, Vanita had an excuse. "Oh, Jason just needed space. He's been busy. He'll call soon." But something about her tone felt wrong. The family started whispering among themselves. "That doesn't sound like him. He wouldn't just disappear. He wouldn't abandon his son like this." And while Vanita kept spinning her web of lies, she carried on with eerie normalcy. But behind closed doors, reality was slipping. The house reeked of death. The curtains stayed drawn, shutting out the light. Friends who stopped by were quickly sent away with excuses. "Jason's not home. He is resting. It's not a good time." Can you imagine walking into someone's home, sensing something is terribly wrong, but being brushed off so convincingly that you start to doubt your own instincts? Meanwhile, the police were slowly piecing inconsistencies together. Jason's bank records showed withdrawals, but not in his usual pattern. Surveillance footage captured his car being driven, but Jason was nowhere in sight. Then came the detail that pushed suspicion higher. Jason's son mentioned to relatives how strange the house had felt the last time he visited. He noticed the smell. He asked questions, but Vanita brushed him off with a calm, "It's nothing, don't worry about it."
On November 29, 2024, Jason's family reached their breaking point. Days had passed with no contact, and his teenage son could no longer take the endless excuses. He convinced Jason's mother to go with him to the house, determined to find answers. The boy hoped, deep down, that maybe his father had simply been too tired or too sick to reach out.
But when they arrived, something felt wrong immediately. The air outside seemed unnaturally still, as though the house itself was holding a secret too heavy to reveal. They knocked on the door again and again. No response. The boy's heart pounded as he remembered all the times his father had opened that same door with a smile. Now it was silent. They tried calling his phone. It rang faintly inside, but nobody picked up. The mother's worry turned into panic. They decided to force their way in. The house was dark, and the smell hit them almost instantly. It was a stench that no candle or excuse could cover anymore. Jason's son covered his mouth, his eyes stinging, but something stronger than fear pulled him toward the bedroom. His grandmother begged him to wait, but he pushed open the door anyway. What he saw would haunt him forever. His father's body lying lifeless in a state no child should ever witness. The boy froze, his breath caught in his throat, his world shattering in a single instant. The silence of the room was broken only by his scream, a sound filled with grief, disbelief, and terror. His grandmother rushed in behind him, collapsing at the sight. Vianita returned to the house while the family was still inside. Instead of shock, instead of the raw grief you'd expect from a girlfriend who had just lost her boyfriend, witnesses described her behavior as bizarre. She paced, she wailed loudly, clutching at her face, but not a single tear fell. Police who arrived moments later would later say her crying was nothing more than an act, a desperate attempt to mask the truth. As officers began questioning her, her story shifted yet again. She spoke of arguments, of Jason leaving suddenly, of not knowing what happened. But the evidence told a different story. The smell, the body, the timeline of her lies, everything pointed to her. The boy, still trembling, told police he had been worried for days, but every time he called, Vianita said her father was fine. She told him Jason was just resting or busy or didn't want to be disturbed. That detail broke the officer's composure. To deceive a child while his father lay dead only feet away, it added another layer of cruelty to the crime. The arrest happened swiftly. Police pulled Vianita aside, cuffed her hands, and led her out of the home she had turned into a tomb. Neighbors gathered outside, whispering in disbelief. The woman they thought they knew, who smiled at them and waved in passing, was now accused of second-degree murder. But here's where another twist came in. Even as she was led into custody, Vianita kept her head high. She insisted she was innocent, that Jason had brought this upon himself, that no one understood what had happened behind closed doors. It wasn't the posture of a grieving friend. It was the defiance of someone convinced she could outsmart everyone, even when the truth lay rotting in the room she'd been sleeping in for weeks. Jason's family, meanwhile, was shattered. His mother clung to her grandson, both of them trembling in shock. For them, the discovery wasn't just the loss of Jason. It was the betrayal of realizing someone he loved, someone he trusted, had kept them in the dark while he lay dead. The teenage boy, in particular, carried the unbearable weight of being the one to find his father. That moment would scar him for life, a memory that no amount of time could erase. The police closed the scene with yellow tape, carrying Jason's body away as neighbors watched in stunned silence. The case that had been hidden behind excuses and lies was finally uncovered. But as Vianita sat in the back of the police car, stone-faced and unbroken, one question lingered in the minds of everyone who saw her. Was this a woman consumed by rage and guilt, or someone who never felt remorse to begin with?
The courtroom was silent when Vianita Bloomfield appeared for the first time in shackles. Her face showed no remorse, no visible grief. She stood before the judge and entered a plea of not guilty.
Despite the evidence, despite the horror of what had been found in that house, she tried to convince the world that she had done nothing wrong. The judge, unmoved by her performance, denied her bond. Vianita was ordered to remain behind bars while awaiting trial. For Jason's family, this decision brought some relief, but no comfort, because no court ruling could ever give Jason back to them. For Jason's son, the trauma was unbearable. At just 15 years old, he had stumbled upon a scene no child should ever witness: his father's lifeless body left to decompose in a locked bedroom, while the woman who should have cared for him lived as if nothing had happened. That moment would haunt him for the rest of his life. His childhood was over in an instant. Jason's mother, shattered by the loss of her son, stood by her grandson, trying to piece together a future from the ashes of tragedy. Every memory of Jason, his laughter, his kindness, the way he cared for his family, now lived side by side with the brutal image of how his life was stolen. Jason Bloomfield's story is one of trust betrayed and innocence lost. His life was taken not by a stranger, but by the woman he loved. His son will carry scars that no court verdict can erase, and his family will forever wonder why. If Jason's story moved you, share it so his memory is never forgotten. Like this video, subscribe, and help us continue bringing these stories to light. When someone can live beside the body of the person they killed, what does that say about the darkness some people carry inside? Share your thoughts below. Thank you for watching, and see you in my next video.